So to talk about how we handle errors when deleting, it's a lot more interesting to look at the doctor than the patient, because after all, there's no reason in the database world why we can't delete a patient. There's no referential integrity constraints or anything to prevent it. So with a doctor though, you see I added a newish doctor here and I can just select delete. So of course the delete, where doctors delete, and we pass the ID of the actual doctor up top here. That's in the link at the showing. So it's very similar to the details page, right? But it was a GET request, and then now when I click delete, it will be a post, okay, to go and delete the doctor. No problem, and they're gone from the list, right? However, if I pick a doctor that has patients, right, do the same thing, then I get this error, right? Because the SQL Server has said, no, we don't have cascade delete here, right? We set that delete behavior to restrict the on delete behavior, so the delete statement conflicted with the reference, and then there's this big long name here, right, for the foreign key constraint, right? Again, it's a DB update exception. So this one we'll have to handle in a very similar way to what we just did for the create, right? So just to review then, so we have to go to the doctor's controller instead of the patient, and right down near the bottom are the two action results, okay? First of all, the get here, so we just pass in the ID of the patient we want to delete. It goes with a link query here to find the patient, first or default, okay, matching the primary key, and then we just return view showing the information for that doctor that we clicked on the link for with a GET request. Then we come back to the post. Now you'll notice that they changed the name. Instead of saying create twice, as we said create twice, we could do that because we had different signatures. Really, we only have passing an integer in both cases, so we have to satisfy the restrictions of object-oriented design, use a different name. So how does the system know that if it gets a post for delete, that this is the chunk of code we want to execute? Well, there's another option right up here in the annotation that we added, where we said this is for handling HTTP post requests, but we can also say of action name delete. So in other words, if we get a post asking for the delete action in our controller, this is the chunk of code we're going to go to, right? That's how we get around being able to change the name if we want. Okay, so again, the idea is pretty straightforward. We get the ID, we go find the doctor, okay? We reference our DB set collection, and we just say remove this particular doctor and save changes, and that will write it out to the database. But of course, if there's an error in the database, then it won't work. We'll get our error messages that we just saw on the screen, right? So to avoid showing the user that message and handling it ourselves, we'll just use a try catch again. Now this step we have to do first anyway. So I'll just push enter after it, and here's where we'll add our try, tab, right? And basically, let me come down here. All three of these lines go inside the try. Okay, and that's it. So if it successfully removes the doctor, redirects back to the index action, shows the list of all the doctors, and it's happy. But if there's an error, it'll go to our catch. So again, I'm going to do my catch for the DB update exception, right? This time I'll check that the inner message contains. Now, I should be careful. This is a lazy approach. I'm just saying FK underscore, right? I didn't take that full big long name of the specific. I could. That would be correct to do so. But because I tend to copy and paste this code and use it in so many different controllers, you only have to worry about if you have more than one foreign key constraint. Then you'd have to be specific. But if you only have one, then I can just say FK underscore, because that'll be the referential integrity constraint that I have to worry about, right? Just be aware that if you have more than one foreign key, then you should be more specific than this, okay? So again, unable to save changes, Remember, you can't delete a doctor that has patients. Notice these first quotes, there's no one field that is kind of referenced here. So by leaving these quotes empty, we're saying, well, there's not a specific field, just show it at the summary at the top of the page, right? Now, something that was missing altogether, it wasn't there before at all, was to say return view back to the doctor view, right? So I have to add that myself down here, because before there was no validation, right, required to delete. So I didn't have the option to go back and redisplay like I do for a create or an edit to show validation errors. So this was missing altogether. It either succeeded or it didn't, and would always go back to the index view, one way or the other. But now that I'm putting this catch in place, I'll catch a database error. How do I show it? Well, I have to return back to the delete view, okay? And I have to pass this model so that the model state can be included with it. The only one thing I have left to do is I have nowhere to show the error message. If I come over here to the views, okay, for doctor, right? If I bring up the delete view, it just, shows all the data for the doctor and then gives me my button down here to submit to actually delete the doctor, right? But there's no validation. There's no spans here to show a validation result. So what I need to do is I need to steal one out of any of the others that have it, like the edit, for example. Right down here, okay, we have a div ASP validation summary, right? So I need to grab this tag out of edit, come over to delete, put it somewhere in here. I often put it right under the HR, the horizontal rule, the line. There. Now I'm saying if there's an error, right, that we're going to actually return, because of course if there's no error, it redirects back to the index. So if there was an error, it will return this view again, and now it can show the model state error. Now that's a slightly different approach than some of the tutorials online. What they have you do is they have you bundle up a message, direct it over to the GET request again, and then just pass it as a parameter, store it in the view bag, and show it here. But to me, we already have this whole structure in place, the ability to add model errors. So I prefer to just take that approach. We'll add a model error, and all we were missing was a place to show it on the screen. It's a lot less work, and it works just as well. Okay, so now if I run it again, and I try to delete a doctor with patients. Oh, not edit, delete. Press the delete key, and there we go. So there was an error, so instead of going back to the index, I'm redisplaying the delete. I'm saying unable to save changes. Remember, you cannot delete a doctor that has patients. So I think that's a pretty good way to show the user. They can go back to the list, right? And away they go. Thing is, if you go back to the index list, it's hard to actually show the error, right? So it's the best place to show it is right there on the delete page. So any questions about delete? Very similar to create, right? In the end, our code looks pretty much the same. Now, to be honest though, when I come back to patient, the patient controller, there really is nothing specific to look for. So if I come way down here to our delete, what I would probably end up putting in here, it's basically the same code, but it looks a little different just because there's less to worry about, right? Again, remember there's no return back to the delete view, so we'll have to add that, but basically this is what we get, okay? We go retrieve our patient from the database, go to the DB set for patients, remove that patient, save changes, read it back to index, but if there's an exception, okay, notice I'm just going to use the general exception here because there is no reason. I don't anticipate this code will ever be hit, right? But for safety, I should put a try catch in here as best practice, right? And that way it'll catch any kind of exception that there was and just say unable to save changes, try again, go for coffee, after 3 donuts and 2 ice caps, come back and try it again, right? And away we go. We return view to patient, but mind you, one thing I can't forget, I have to do the same trick. Coming down here to the views for patient, I'll come into the edit, grab the div for the validation summary, go into my delete view for the patient, and add it in. Otherwise, that message will be passed to the view with no opportunity to display on the page, right? If there's not an ASP validation summary there to show it. that's it for deleting. Any questions about delete? As I said, it's a little different from some of the tutorials you find online, but I think just using the model state and errors and showing a validation summary is actually less complicated than some of the solutions I see online.